Molly. Hi everyone, my name is Meg Vaughan and I work in the John Lewis Partnership. My title is Care Experience Specialist and that's because I work in a very unique team in our business, which is all about supporting those who have care experience. So any individual who has been in the care system at some point in their lives. We're a relatively new team. We only started work about 2 years ago. We kind of came together then. And we've been working ever since on how our business, how the partnership really supports those who have been in care, inside and outside of the business. So hopefully you're quite familiar with John Lewis. Hopefully you've been into one of our stores before, but just for those of you who aren't so familiar, the partnership is made up of two brands, John Lewis and Waitrose, both retail sites, but with behind kind of the scenes of that, we also have our distribution networks, we have hotels which are for partners only, we have our head office space, and we actually have locations globally across the world as well. We're a slightly different business than most. We're the largest employee-owned business in the UK. We've got 70,000 partners up and down the country. But what that really means is that we don't have investors who spend a lot of cash and invest in the business. We don't have shareholders that way. Each one of us is what we call a partner, so someone who owns the business, and everything we do kind of comes back into the business and back to us in the way of investing in the business, or hopefully, if we're doing really well, through a bonus. We also have democracy in the business, so we have council and elected representatives, which is why we take things really personally in our business and why we're slightly different than other retailers like Marks and Spencer's, Asda, etc. We're quite different that way. Hopefully you're quite familiar and you've been into one of our stores. But anyway, so our purpose within the business is very much working in partnership for a happier world. When we were set up by our founder, John Speed and Lewis, his way of doing business very much felt quite radical, is how they called it. But everything that we've kind of been working towards, and we still work towards, is making the communities within which we reside a better place. And everything in terms of inclusivity kind of sits at the heart of this and is very much a part of every kind of aspect that we look at. So whilst we may sell tins of beans or your sofa in your living room, actually there's a lot more that sits behind that. And even our vision is to become the UK's most inclusive business, not only for partners, but for customers, and really helping the communities. We have a lot of things that we do within this kind of purpose. A lot of kind of businesses out there, as I'm sure you'll be familiar, have the words on the wall, but do they actually take action? And although I'm biased because I work for the partnership, I really believe that we take action in a lot of various different ways. You may have kind of seen our green token schemes in our branches. That's part of our Community Matters, where we really help the local community and the charities that reside within that. And in fact, you know, one of our branches, Liverpool, they've been doing a lot of work in their community to help Strawberry Fields, which is an organisation that supports special educational needs. We've been working with Witherslack as well in some of our locations, and there's many other different aspects to the Community Matters Fund. Within that, we also have our networks across the business, which includes, I think we have 8 or 9 different networks, and these are places that represent groups of people who feel like they need to have some more support around them potentially. So we have the Ability Network, for example, the Carers Network, Pride in the Partnership, Gender Equality. These are all places for individuals who work in our business to come together and to have a voice, where they have events or they have keynote speakers or they influence what we do in the business. And they're a really important part of what we do and how we take action, not only inside but outside of the business. But what I will say is I'm definitely not an expert when it comes to inclusivity or neurodiversity. My kind of area of expertise, if you will, is in care experience. So I'd like to kind of tell you a little bit more about what we're doing in the Building Happier Future space, and I'll explain why that's linked to being neurodiverse, and inclusivity as we go into it. So building happier futures, as I said, began 2 years ago, and it very much is looking at how we support those who are care experienced. So we've done quite a lot of work in this space. My kind of area of expertise is all in employability and educational programs, and this is where we're looking at how we support those who are in care or have been in care, how they become employed, how they get employment, because it's not an easy world to do that. But we also have lots of other things that play a part of building happier futures, including how we influence government and the policies that are there to support them. We also look at the policies in-house, like how we support partners who want to become foster parents or who are kinship carers, so family members who have taken over the primary care of those young people. We also work a lot with charities, and we fundraise for them so that they can support, just like Action for Children and Who Cares Scotland. We provide scholarships with the Open University for those who are care experienced. And we're also looking at how we can build it into everything that we do, including the products that we sell. So just before Christmas, we actually launched Made by Care, which is a bag that was designed and created by a young person who is care experienced. He's called Michael. He's from Scotland. He's amazing. He designed this bag for us that we then sold over Christmas, and it's now in our stores. And we're looking to expand that brand as well, so that we have, by the end of the year, hopefully a few more products under that label of Made by Care. So it's quite an important part that we're trying to thread into everything that we do. But how it links, I guess, is that what we've really uncovered is that over the last 2 years, where we've interacted with many young people, helping them into employment through our programs for employment and education, a lot of them come with or kind of experience things that really they struggle with, I guess. So neurodiverse things that really throw them off or create challenges or barriers for them personally. And so I'd like to kind of share with you some of the stories that we've had and that we've case studies, I guess, in a way, of what we've experienced. Because neurodiversity can really impact how someone goes into employment. It can impact their ability to have a really successful interview. And if they are then hired, we then go into reasonable adjustments and how a business like mine can support them. But I'd like to kind of take you through three very different stories of young people that we've interacted with. And maybe this might be familiar to you. So firstly, I'd like to introduce you to Liam. Liam joined us last year on our employment programme. He came along to what we call the employability drop-in, and this is where we invite young people to come along to their local site, so whether that's a Waitrose or a John Lewis branch. They meet some of the partners that work there, they get a little presentation about what the business is and why it's slightly different, and then they get a tour of the store, so front and back of house. It's very informal, and we've put that in place to really help some of those initial anxieties that come along with going somewhere you've never been before and meeting people you've never met. Sometimes that creates a huge barrier. And we do have a lot of people that just can't do it on the day and they don't show up. But for those who are able to come along, Liam was one of them, and he came along to the drop-in and took part and spoke to some people in the store and seemed to get a lot out of it. He was very shy, as we expected, and at some points it probably didn't look like he was listening very much, but he came along to the session, and that's half the battle. He took part in one day of work experience with us, and then he decided that we weren't right for him, that he couldn't continue. And that may seem initially like it wasn't successful, but what we found out from the council later is that that was the first time that Liam had actually left his house for 2 months to come along to that drop-in and then come along to the work experience. That was the first time that he had taken that step to leave his place, his safety net, I guess, to come and explore something different. And for us, that was a huge success. It's not just about getting people into a job. If we've made just one little encouragement that has a really big change for them, but they can have that courage to take a step out when they're dealing with those barriers that they may be facing, whether that's mentally or physically, then that is a huge success. So a massive kind of win for Liam. I'd then like to introduce you to Charlotte. So Charlotte came along to one of our employability programs last year as well. She attended the drop-in and she came along to work experience. She went through our interview, application support, and she got a job with us on a temporary contract over Christmas. Now, when Charlotte started with us, she was quite angry. She didn't have a very good way of managing her anger. And if her routine was disrupted in any way, it kind of sent her over the roof. So it was really challenging for us because it was something that we hadn't come across before. And so the managers who were looking after her had to take a lot of patience and a lot of support in order to provide a really good experience and to support her so that she wasn't putting herself or anyone else in harm's way. We had one incident where she'd come into work and found out that she had been moved from one till to another. And that sent her, that kind of triggered her in a way. And she ended up verbally abusing some of the staff, and even punching a wall, which was quite difficult to deal with in the moment. And that's quite serious behaviour for an organisation to deal with. But thankfully, because of the steps that we had put in place, the managers there were able to really support Charlotte and have conversations with her in order to help understand what it was that caused that trigger and what they could do to help put her in good stead for next time that occurred. So if that was to happen again, how would she manage it different? Now, 3 months later, we have a very different Charlotte in front of us. She, is still dealing with anger issues and other kind of triggers in place, but her ability to manage those problems was significantly different. And although Charlotte didn't stay with us, she decided to continue with her education. The difference in her behaviour was huge, just from having the work experience, having the 3 months of real life kind of experience in a role, and having the support systems around her in place. She was able to become a lot more independent and a lot more able to manage her behaviour. She knew that if something triggered her, she could take herself up the shop floor, go to a quiet room to calm herself down, or go and find someone to talk to. And just from 3 months' work, that had a massive impact in her ability to be an adult and to really kind of be independent and someone who could fit into society really easily and work really well with what we do. So again, another huge success. And finally, I'd like to introduce you to Finley. So Finley joined on one of our kind of pilot employability programs back in 2022. Now, originally, because of Finley's needs, he wanted to go into an operations role, which is kind of more back of house. You still come out to the front to kind of put sets together, so putting furniture together or setting up those little kind of home studio areas. But on the most part, you sit behind the scenes, so you're out of way. And initially, Finley felt that that was really good for him. But quite quickly, Finley's behaviour started to really decline. And upon kind of inquiring as to what was going on, it turned out that he was lonely. So operations wasn't actually really the right place for him to work. You know, he was going into our kind of back of house, which tends to be quite crammed, full of stock, and it's also windowless, and you might be working solo for quite a lot of your time. So, you know, it meant that he was quite lonely, and that was really not helping his ability to thrive in that working environment. So with the kind of questioning, the managers decided to move him into a selling role where he was with customers, and what a difference that made. He came in suited and booted, he looked $100, and he was there impressing with customers. And his confidence, because he'd had that first step in operations, he was ready for that kind of conversation. And he was ready to talk to the customers and tell them all about our products. And he's still with us now. He's thriving in his work. And we still have blips every now and then, but because he's formed such a good relationship with the managers that work there, he is really doing well. So 3 very different stories, each not your kind of typical individual who gets kind of brought into the business, but each kind of having their own form of success. And a lot of that comes down to their ability, their willingness to learn and um, to kind of succeed in what they're doing, but also the support systems that are in place. And I think that's really crucial. And from that, and from our other kind of interactions that we've had with young people along the way, we've had many different kind of learns. I think it's been a really steep learning curve for what we've been involved in. So, in terms of kind of those learns, their reality, every person's in reality is different. I think that's really obvious, isn't it? It's probably an obvious thing for me to say. But when it comes to neurodivergence or, any kind of thing that someone's facing, even if you're diagnosed with the same thing, your reality will be very different from the person next to you. And I think what we found is a real kind of seed to success is making sure that we get to know those individuals behind the name badge, and we really understand where they're coming from and what their reality is. It's also really important to provide what we call scaffolding, which is the support that sits around an individual. So, most people, your kind of average person, will have their family to rely on. They'll have friends, a good social group, and then they'll have kind of the professional bodies that sit around them, whether that's kind of healthcare potentially, whether that's your employer or your teachers. For the care experience people that we deal with, actually they don't have the family or the friends a lot of time, and so their scaffolding is quite slim. It's not as strong as your average person. And for those who are neurodivergent, they may have aspects of that scaffolding missing too. So it's really important as employers to really consider how we can step into that space and be that support, or how we can find other elements of support with them as well. So can we collaborate as an employer with a social worker, or can we collaborate with a parent to help a young person to really thrive? The other big learn that we've had is the impact that this has had. We hoped, of course, that our work would have an impact on the young people we were dealing with. Otherwise, I guess what's the point? But we really hoped that it would have an impact in the way of building their confidence, giving them a meaningful career, allowing them to thrive, not just survive. And we've seen that absolutely from those who have either come through the business and become partners like myself, or even gone on to do other things like progress into higher education or found a job elsewhere. All those successes in their own way. What was unusual for us is to understand the impact it had on the partners who were working in those sites. So where we had these employability programs running, we started to notice the impact that working with these people, with these young people, and providing that support and really thinking about them as individuals and how we can go the extra mile for them was having an impact on their morale and their happiness. And that's been a really unusual outcome of some of this work, and something we're kind of investigating and exploring a little bit more. But it has been quite eye-opening, is when I guess you help other people, you feel good too. So it's just about how we see that in our branches when we have teams of those who are running these programs, how they then feel the benefit and the reward of helping those too. And I guess the final one is we're not for everyone. Our business is very particular. We're a retail business. And that does mean that you're on the shop floor a lot of the time. If you're in the shops, you're on your feet all day. You have to talk to customers. So if you're not socially or wanting to be quite social with people, it's probably not the right job for you. I remember when I was a checkout girl in Waitrose, the thought of being on the meat or fish counters was absolutely not something I was interested in whatsoever. And thankfully, I found my way out of the shop and into head office, which was much more my cup of tea. But for some people, that's absolutely their bread and butter, being on the shop, talking to customers, chatting about their day, telling them about the products that we sell. That's, for some people, that's absolutely perfect. But if we're not right for you, then that's also okay. We're not for everyone. And I think that's been a really important learn for us, is to take some of that ego out of it and realize that some of these people that go through our program will get a taste of the John Lewis partnership and decide that we're not right for them. And that's okay. That's perfectly fine. That's a snapshot of some of the things we've learned. We've learned a huge amount more, but I could probably take up your whole day if I went through them. So I won't do that so much. Um, but in terms of kind of the skills that employers are looking for, I'm sure you've all come across the list that you see in job outlines or in applications. Where they talk about resilience and emotional intelligence. They talk about digital skills. These are all really important in the workplace. But I think, what's really important when it comes to anyone who is facing into some barriers of their own is if they've got a willingness to learn and they have communication skills, then we can do something with that. I think what's really important here is that some of these skills will come with time. Some of them we have a natural skill for, but all that kind of skills around creativity or critical thinking, that can all be built. But what can't be built is the willingness to learn, the attitude that sits behind it. And the communication skills, that's something that we can only kind of really learn by getting involved in it there and then. So by being in that shop and talking to customers. So when it comes to what we look for as an organization, those are kind of the really top ones for us, is communication and a willingness to learn. So something that, to really consider. So in terms of what we can all do, and I'd like to kind of focus on this, is you are all kind of the experts of your individual young people. You know them far better than I ever will. But in terms of helping with employment, there are three main things that can really be of value. The first one is kind of collaborating with employers, and this is quite an unusual one. But what we have certainly found, and it's very new to us, is there's definitely an opportunity to work with the employer to help your young person thrive. So in Charlotte's example, for example, one of the things that we did to really help her understand what was triggering and what was kind of causing the issues was we invited her mothers to come in, and the mothers and the managers had a conversation just to understand, what was going on outside of work, what was kind of the underlying issues, and any advice that the mothers had that they could help us with Charlotte. It's quite unusual. I'll probably say that most employers would be very unfamiliar with that, but there is always a choice to kind of ask the employer to have that collaboration. In other instances, we have had a kind of three-way conversation between the social worker, the young person, and the manager, understanding how they can help and how they can support. Because as I said, that scaffolding piece is really important. If we can come together to help that young person thrive, then that's, a really great thing that we should be doing. It also helps us to understand if we need to put reasonable adjustments in place. What do those reasonable adjustments look like? We may have some guidelines in our business about what we can do as employers for reasonable adjustments, like, for example, changing someone's schedule, ensuring they come in a bit later so that they, it sits in line with their ability to get to work, but we don't have an exhaustive list. So any kind of suggestions or guidance that you can help us to make so that we can understand if that's going to work for the operation, then that's a really great conversation to have with the employer. So I really recommend finding a way to make contact, or even encouraging your young person to talk and have that open, honest conversation about what they need and how that business can support them. Now, that's not to say that businesses can do everything, because it's a reasonable adjustment. It has to work for the business as well as the young person. But there are definitely ways to have that conversation and to find out if there is stuff that we can do to support whatever might be blocking an individual. Encourage and celebrate is an obvious one, hopefully. If you are parents of someone who is employed, this is quite a new role to them, or they're struggling, encouragement goes such a long way. We found through our kind of employment programs that a lot of the time when they kind of first start enroll, they start to self-sabotage a little bit, because they don't want to feel rejected, or they don't want to go through the rigmarole of being turned away again because they've had that so much in their lives. So giving them that encouragement more so than you would normally for anyone, I think is really important, and celebrating where they're going, really right. I think what we've done in other kind of situations is we've provided little certificates to say, hey, look, these are the skills that you've learned and you're only on week 2, you're doing really well, or even just searching for feedback from those who they've been working with. But I would always encourage that to be happening outside of work as well, you know, celebrating, well done for doing that in work today, or even asking them to try and encourage them to celebrate themselves. What was the good thing that happened in work today? What are you most proud of? I think that can go a really long way to helping individuals to build their confidence, and just help them move forward. And finally, it's find opportunities to build those skills. So by that, I mean really helping individuals to find opportunities, such as asking if you can do work experience or shadowing in businesses. Volunteering, again, is another kind of good way to start to build some of those skills. So if you have a young person who is struggling to get their first job, or is struggling to find employment, it is definitely worth asking employers if they are willing to do a bit of unpaid work experience. We offer on our program 3 days. It's not a full shift, and it isn't paid, but it does give that person a realistic idea of what it's like to work in that shop, because they'll then find out that it is on your feet all day, but there's great people to chat to, and it's quite good fun when you're in the moment and it's busy. So giving them those experiences is only going to help them build their confidence and their understanding of the reality of the workplace. So I recommend reaching out to employers and asking. We have a huge amount of parents who contact us asking for work experience for their young people, and we can't always provide it, but we try our best to organise it. And I think actually a lot of John Lewis branches and Waitrose branches provide it for schools as well, anyway. So it's quite a normal thing for us to be offering. And I think many employers do that as well, because it's a good way of really understanding if a business is right for you, or if that area or that career is what you want to kind of go after. So a short and sweet presentation, but hopefully a little bit of insight into the John Lewis Partnership, and what we're doing to kind of support all kind of different areas within our purpose of working in partnership for a happier world. Thank you so much for listening. I'm happy to answer as many questions as I can before we finish.
Yeah, brilliant. That was great. Thank you so much, Meg. And we've had a few questions coming in. So the first one is, my teen is anxious and struggles to even make the phone call to order a takeaway. So preparing for a job in a shop as big and as busy as John Lewis just feels totally out of reach. With this in mind, how can I prepare him to feel confident enough to take the leap and even approach an employer like yourself?
Gosh, yeah, I completely understand that. I think the phone call thing, even I kind of really struggle to make phone calls, but that first step is the hardest. What I would kind of really encourage is, if John Lewis and Waitrose is too big a business, see if there are any local organisations that you can kind of make contact with. But other than that, it's kind of those micro movements towards it. So if he or she, sorry, is not ready for that kind of first step of just picking up the phone or even emailing someone, the first step I would say is take them on a visit to go shopping there. Not that I'm trying to get you to buy products or anything, but just go to the store and walk around with them, so that they get familiar with, what the environment is, what it's like, even kind of how to get there, or what that kind of environment is going to be like for them. Then after that, maybe it is about looking online for a little bit at the videos that we have on our website around employment. And actually, instead of phoning, if that's too big of a hassle, or if it's too much of a step for your individual, emailing can sometimes be a little bit easier because you have time to think in the moment, and you have time to kind of plan out what you're going to say, and you have time to digest any responses as well before you then go back to someone. The other kind of thing I would suggest is, if they are getting ready to call someone, what I found really helps, some of the young people that I've been dealing with, is actually to write out a bit of a script beforehand. So I think with your takeaway example, what I've seen young people do is write out the kind of script of exactly what they're going to say, so that when they're on the phone, they can see that in front of them. These might sound like really simple solutions, but just taking those micro gains first and lead up to the calling someone or asking for some work experience, I think that can really help. And actually just repeating and practicing, I think that's how you build that practice, that it becomes natural for them rather than this big deal that they can't get over.
Yeah, brilliant. I think even I make notes before every call that I make. It's just a natural thing to do, isn't it?
Yeah,
Next question is it okay to ask for the questions before the interview?
absolutely. So I'm not sure how other employers will respond, but certainly for us, we actually share the questions ahead of time. As of, I think, last week, we now publish all our interview questions online on our JLP Jobs website. So you can see all of them. What we kind of did when we first started the Building Happier Futures initiative, we started that about a year ago. We started sharing the specific interview questions. The reason we did that is because we were finding that the young people on our programs had never been to an interview before and had never ever experienced an interview. So they were turning up and just sitting in silence or having one word answers, which meant that our assessors couldn't do anything with it. Even with the probing questions, they weren't getting any responses. So what we decided to do was, within our work experience, we hold like an interview skills session with those young people to support them. And then we also share the questions ahead of time. Obviously, not all employers follow what we do, um, but we found a massive change in the success rates for our interviews because those young people knew what they were going into, they knew what to expect. They also had a familiar face, so we made sure that the people who were on work experience with them were the ones who were interviewing them. And then they had kind of had chance to prep those questions. So I would definitely ask the question for employers. I think it's a new thing that employers are looking to do. Research shows that it provides a better candidate because everyone gets nervous with interviews, hopefully, unless you're crazy. You're incredible at what you do. I certainly get nervous with interviews, but having the questions beforehand and being able to prep your answers just takes that pressure off. It doesn't mean that you'll be reading those answers off a script and therefore you won't come across naturally. It just takes that pressure off and allows you to prep it. So that was a really roundabout way of me saying ask the question for sure. There are some employers who already do it.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. And I think we've just got one last question. My problem is motivation. My son is 16 and is just totally uninspired to think about his next steps. He's struggled all his life, but I feel like he's declining and mental health is also on the decline due to lack of routine, not being in school. Do you have any tips for getting him interested in thinking about a career or even just something like a part-time job?
Yeah, do you know what? The only way, well, not the only way, I'm not an expert at all. I would say the best way to kind of really motivate someone is never going to be you talking at them or them reading something. They've got to experience it. So finding opportunities to get him to do some work experience or some volunteering, or just even like a day shadowing someone. One of the young people that I came into contact with a while ago, um, they were looking, they weren't looking for work, but they'd just kind of fallen off the track of education, and they were just kind of stuck in a negative loop, I guess, of not really knowing what they wanted to do, and really floundering. And in the end, this is going to be so random. They booked themselves onto a blacksmithing course, and it was a one-day course. It didn't have any prospects of employment or anything like that, but they went along to it for a day, and because they were there experiencing that, and they weren't just reading it or they weren't just being told about it, they were there actually experiencing it physically, that had such a change on them. They just were able to really think, oh, that's really interesting, maybe that's somewhere I want to go into. Or, you know, how do I get into a career like that? You know, is it artistry or is it kind of more production? And it just sparked that energy for them. So I would definitely encourage getting them into an experience, in order for them to really understand what's right for them. It might take a long time for you to kind of find what is it that they're really into and what do they find exciting. But that's the way to break that cycle of getting caught up in their head, I would say.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Meg. And that's the end of our presentation. What a brilliant presentation to end the day on. And that also brings us to the end of our virtual conference.